Hi again. This is another response video. I came across something on TikTok the other day, which I thought I could contribute to. Unlike the last response I did, which was a criticism both of the content and of the person who made it, their intentions, I should say, I don't think this one has any bad intentions, just that the person who did it isn't very well educated in the background of what it is that they're saying, and as a result, maybe they've been convinced of something that they wouldn't have if they knew more about the subject. This is an idea I've encountered before, I think at least a couple of times, which is that the first word of the Hebrew Bible, which is usually translated in the beginning, actually is a kind of code which symbolically stands for the story of the Crucifixion. So let's start first with the video.
The very first word of the Bible is bereshit.
Okay, so the word bereshit begins with a bet. Underneath it are two dots. This is called a shva, and it means that the sound is going to be a b sound. Then we have re, and then following that we have shit. So reshit means beginning or start. Bereshit, in the beginning or start.
Now, the amazing thing about Hebrew words is that these words are composed of not just characters, but every character actually has an image and a word associated with it. And this is what makes this so incredibly cool.
Now, this isn't entirely correct. Since the Hebrew alphabet, like other writing systems like cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphics in Egypt, since it began with pictures that symbolize actual objects and then eventually became letters, it would make more sense to say that it was the words that he's talking about that came first, and then the letters came to represent them, rather than saying that this alphabet was designed so that each letter would carry with it a particular meaning. Here's a chart with most of the letters. You can see, for example, that in the upper right-hand corner we have the bet, which we just saw, and the word bet in Semitic languages means house. So that even though you might not have guessed that just from looking at it here, the original form of the letter would have been simply a drawing of a house, which eventually evolved away from that as the letters became purely representations of specific sounds and not ideas that you might find, say, in Chinese, where the character doesn't represent one letter, but a whole concept.
So that word bereshit, it is spelt bet, resh, aleph, shin, yod, tav. So I'll have that overlaid on the screen so that you can see these characters. As I go along, I'm going to kind of create a diagram showing you this. Bet means house. Resh means person. But whenever that bet and the resh are next to each other, that will create a new image, which is son, because it is the person of the house.
Okay, this is also problematic because, first of all, it sounds like he's trying to create a new symbol, the bet and the resh together. They are separate letters. And to suggest that because resh, as he says, means person, which it actually doesn't. It means head. And together with the house, person of the house would mean son. I don't know why it should be son any more than any other member of a family. But apart from all of that, there's another problem, which is that the word for son in Hebrew is not bar. It's actually ben. The word bar means son in Aramaic. Now, as a Christian, I suppose, might find this more natural because you actually have some Aramaic names in the New Testament. And we do find Aramaic names from around the same time in the land of Israel. For example, you may have heard of Bar Kokhba, who led a Jewish rebellion against Roman authority in the 2nd century CE. His name, which was really a nickname, means son of a star. So not only do we have to combine these two letters in the way he has done, but we have to say that, in fact, we're not talking about Hebrew, we are talking about Aramaic.
Following that, we have Aleph, which means God.
Aleph does not mean God. Aleph is simply the first letter of the alphabet, which may be the reason why someone decided to connect the two together. There is a word in Hebrew, aluf, which in modern Hebrew means champion. And there's also the word elef, which means 1,000. That's in the Bible. But there's certainly nothing that would inevitably connect this particular letter with God.
Following that, we have the shin, which means destroy.
Now, the letter shin, he is apparently thinking of some sort of a verb here, but there isn't any obvious one as far as I can say. There is a verb lishanot, which means to change. There are actually quite a few words in the Bible which mean something like destroy, but none of them are related to this particular root. In fact, the most obvious root here is not a verb, but rather a noun like the others. In this case, shen, which means tooth, and maybe bears still a slight visual resemblance to the letter, at least if we're talking about several teeth.
Following that, we have a yod. Now, the yod is cool for two reasons. One, the yod means hand, but it is also represented by the symbol of a nail. And then,
so yad does mean hand, and the two certainly do seem to be connected. But then to go on and say that it's like a nail, that's presumably because the top part of the letter curves slightly to the left into a bit of a hook. But then again, there is a letter, vav, the 6th letter of the alphabet, which actually means hook, and which does the same thing, but it's longer than the yud, which would make it a much more obvious candidate for nail. Unfortunately, the word bereshit does not have a vav in it. So the alphabet we've been looking at is actually the older Hebrew alphabet, which is an alphabet that was shared with other speakers of similar languages in the ancient Near East. Traditionally, people say that this alphabet was actually invented by the Phoenicians, who lived somewhat to the north, more or less where Lebanon is today. That's a less popular idea now, but certainly they also used the same basic system as we find here. So two things. First of all, we should bear in mind that this was not a Hebrew or Israelite, certainly not Jewish alphabet in any sense. It was older and used by the entire region, so we should be careful in assigning any symbology we see in it to a specifically Judeo-Christian narrative. Second, as far as the idea of the Tav being a cross, this seems to be of a piece with other attempts I've seen, and probably you have too, to look for things that look like crosses. For example, the girders that were found at Ground Zero in New York, which looked like a cross from a certain angle, or this, is it a protein that has been photographed under an electron microscope and also looks cross-shaped. But again, it's a question of what angle you're looking at and whether you already come to it with certain preconceptions. This is what's called pareidolia, in which you look at things you haven't seen before, or things you have seen but from a new angle based on something you're imposing upon it.
God, destroyed, hand, cross. The very first word of the Bible, bereshit, literally means that the Son of God will be destroyed by his own hand on the cross. That is the very first word of the entire Bible.
Okay, so we've already seen that he's willing to take a lot of liberties in the way he interprets these letters, especially with the beginning part about the Son. Now he's going to go even farther by putting them all together into a grammatically coherent sentence. So, the Son of God will be destroyed. Even if he was correct that the shin represents a verb, how do we get from destroy to will be destroyed? It would make at least as much sense to suggest that the Son of God was doing the destroying on someone else. Then we have by his own hand. Why is it his own hand? Why isn't it just a hand or the hand? Could be anyone's hand. And finally, on the cross. Not a cross, but the cross with a capital C. Again, this is doing a lot of heavy lifting, no pun intended.
And every word has a sentence or a phrase built into it. And the phrase of bereshit is that the Son of God will be destroyed by his own hand on the cross.
So, what I'm reminded of by this is the kind of thing that has been turning up a lot in the last, 20 or 30 years among both evangelical Christians and, to a degree, Orthodox Jews. Some, at least. Meaning that there have been attempts on the basis of very little knowledge to construct all sorts of unlikely but symbolically significant relationships between different things. So, for example, I think there's at least a couple of books which make the claim that Hebrew must have been the language spoken in the Garden of Eden. And we know this because if we look at other seemingly unrelated languages, in other words, not Semitic languages like the ones we've been talking about here, but say Greek and Latin and German and so on, that we can see that there are certain words in common. I read one of these books, and what it did was two things. First, it took even a couple of letters that seemed to be shared in common between two languages, and then tried to extend the meaning of the words in one of those languages until it would fit the fields of meanings in the other language. I have studied Greek and Latin as well as Hebrew, and whoever did this knew nothing about linguistics or these specific languages, but was simply seizing on whatever they could, just as this video today has done. I'm also reminded of this whole business of Bible codes, which again is the equivalent of looking for the quarter, must be more than that by now, but under the lamppost. I seem to remember that someone pointed out just how selective that process is by doing exactly the same thing with Moby Dick, which was like the Bible in the sense that it had a very large number of words, out of which could be found all sorts of patterns, which were no less significant. So in the end, I think what we have here is a triumph of knowing as little as possible about a subject, which frees you to speak about it however you would like. So I think that's all for today, and I will see you again soon.